I stared at the monitor in the back office, my jaw tight. On the screen, the grainy HD footage from Bus 47 showed something I'd never seen in 20 years of education. A 22-year-old man, 6 feet tall and acting like a thug, was standing in the well of a school bus, looming over a driver who looked small, old, and absolutely terrified. Behind him, 2 other women, an older mother and a college-aged sister, were screaming slurs so loud the audio sensors were peeking into the red. You could hear the muffled whimpers of 6th graders in the back seats, literal children watching 3 adults hijack their morning commute. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because stories about entitled parents getting exactly what they deserve, they're the reason I do this. And trust me, Kitul, you won't believe how hard the hammer falls on this family. My dad, David, leaned forward, his finger hovering over the pause button. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. That was the scary part. He'd spent years in a war-zone school where fights were a daily sport, so he knew a threat when he saw one. "That's malicious harassment," the school cop whispered, standing behind him, "and definitely trespassing." My dad didn't blink. He just watched the mother point a finger in the driver's face, her mouth twisted in a snarl. "I don't care who they think they are," my dad said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "They picked the wrong bus, and they definitely picked the wrong school." He looked at the cop. "Find them. Now." Before we get into how my dad started dismantling this family's life, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button if you're into stories where the bad guys actually face consequences. I post these every week, and honestly, the justice in this one only gets sweeter. Anyway, back to the story. To understand why my dad reacted the way he did, you have to understand where he came from. For 15 years, he was the assistant principal at a school we'll just call the Trenches. It was overpopulated, underfunded, and felt more like a correctional facility than a place of learning. "David, we've got another one in the cafeteria," a teacher would yell. My dad wouldn't even sigh. He'd just put down his coffee, walk into a swarm of 50 kids, and pluck the 2 fighters out by their collars like he was picking up stray kittens. He dealt with everything there. Drugs in the lockers, knives in the bathrooms, Chikujum parents who showed up to IEP meetings looking for a physical fight. He was the guy who had to suspend kids every single day just to keep the building from imploding. It hardened him. It made him a man who could spot a liar from a mile away and a bully from 100 yards. So when he got the job at this new school, it felt like a retirement. "It's quiet," he told me after his first week. He sat on the porch, actually looking relaxed for once. "The kids say, please. The parents actually care about grades. I haven't seen a single fistfight in 5 days." This new school was the dream. It was a high-performing district where the biggest drama was usually someone's honors project being a day late. In his first 8 months there, he only had one real incident: an autistic student who had a rough episode and needed some extra support. That was it. My dad started to soften. He started to think that maybe he could finally stop being the hammer and just be an educator. He enjoyed the peace. He liked the fact that he didn't have to look over his shoulder in the parking lot anymore. But that's the thing about people who have spent their lives in a war zone. They don't lose their edge. They just hide it. The entitled mother and her kids thought they were dealing with a soft administrator in a nice school. They thought they could walk onto a bus, terrorize a driver, and walk away because people in this district were too polite to fight back. They had no idea who my dad really was. The man on the other side of that bus door wasn't a fighter. His name was Mr. Henderson, But the kids just called him H. He was 64 years old with a back that complained every time he hit a pothole and a smile that made even the grumpiest freshman feel welcome. H is the heart of this district, my dad told me later that night. He's the kind of guy who remembers every kid's birthday. He keeps a stash of extra pencils for the ones who forget theirs. He's a good man. Mr. Henderson had been driving for 20 years without a single blemish on his record. No accidents, no write-ups, and definitely no confrontations. He took pride in his bus. He'd arrive at the lot 45 minutes early every morning just to make sure the heaters were blasting so the kids wouldn't be cold while they waited in the driveways. But being a good man doesn't make you a target. It makes a bully's behavior even more disgusting. On the morning of the incident, H was doing his usual route. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, just a pale gray light hitting the frost on the windows. You could hear the low hum of the engine and the soft chatter of kids who were still half asleep. It was peaceful. H pulled up to the curb of a house he'd been stopping at for months. This was where he picked up Entitled Girl, or EG. Now H didn't like trouble. If a kid was being a little loud, he'd just catch their eye in the mirror and give a small shake of his head. Usually, that was enough. But EG was different. She was a junior who acted like she owned the pavement she stood on. To her, H wasn't a person. He was a servant who was lucky to be in her presence. "He's just doing his job," my dad said, watching the start of the footage where H pulls up. "He's just trying to get these kids to school safely. He doesn't get paid enough to be a punching bag for someone's ego." H opened the doors, the pneumatic hiss echoing in the quiet morning air. He didn't know that in less than 10 seconds, his quiet life was about to be turned upside down. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Henderson was dropping the kids off after a long day, and the bus was loud with that post-school energy. EG was standing in the aisle before the bus had even come to a full stop. "Sit down, please," H said, his voice calm. "Wait until the wheels stop turning." EG didn't even look at him. She just adjusted her backpack and rolled her eyes. "Whatever, just open the door." H waited until the bus settled. He pulled the lever, and the doors creaked open. As EG stepped down, she dropped a wrapper, a sticky, half-eaten granola bar, right on the top step. "Excuse me," H called out. "Can you pick that up, please? We keep a clean bus." EG stopped on the pavement and turned around. She looked at H like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "That's literally what you're paid for. Clean it yourself, old man." H felt a flare of heat in his chest, but he kept his cool. "I'm paid to drive you safely. I'm not your maid. Pick it up, or I'll have to write a report." "Write it," she snapped. "My mom knows people. You'll be looking for a new job by Monday." She stomped off toward her house, but she wasn't done. H watched her in the side mirror. She pulled her phone out before she even reached the front door. Her thumbs were flying across the screen. Now, I'm not 100% sure what she texted her mother. My dad thinks she told her the driver had assaulted her or screamed at her. Knowing girls like EG, she probably made it sound like she was in fear for her life. 10 seconds later, the front door of the house flew open. Out came the entitled mother, or EM. She didn't walk. She marched. She was screaming before she even hit the curb, her face a bright, ugly shade of purple. "You think you can talk to my daughter like that?" she shrieked, waving her arms. "You think you're someone?" H didn't engage. He knew the protocol. He pulled the lever, closed the doors, and kept his eyes forward. He didn't even look at her as he shifted into gear and drove away. He figured she was just a hot-headed parent having a bad day. He figured it was over. He should have trusted his gut, but he didn't. The next morning, H pulled onto the street at 6:45 a.m. The neighborhood was silent, shrouded in a thin gray fog. As he approached EG's driveway, he noticed something strange. EG wasn't standing by the mailbox like usual. Instead, 3 figures were lined up on the curb like a firing squad. H pulled the bus to a stop, his heart beginning to thump against his ribs. He saw the mother, EM, looking even more deranged in the morning light. Next to her was a young man in his early 20s, entitled brother, and a girl in her late teens, the college-aged sister. They weren't holding backpacks. They were holding a grudge. "Where's the student?" H muttered to himself. He should have kept the doors shut. He should have driven past and called dispatch. But H was a man of habit. He thought maybe they just wanted to talk. He pulled the lever. The doors hissed open. Before he could even say, "Good morning," all 3 adults stormed onto the bus. They didn't just step up, they surged. The brother led the charge, his boots heavy on the metal floor. He stood in the well of the bus, looming over H, trapping him in the driver's seat. "You like talking to little girls?" the brother roared. His breath smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap coffee. "You like being a tough guy behind a wheel?" EM was right behind him, her finger inches from H's nose. "You're done. Do you hear me? I'm going to make sure you never work in this state again." The sister joined in, her voice a shrill, piercing nails on a chalkboard scream. "Tell him, Mom. Tell this loser what happens when you mess with us." The kids on the bus, some as young as 11, went dead silent. Then, the whimpering started. A 6th-grade girl in the front row began to cry, her small hands clutching her backpack. H sat frozen. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. He was trapped between the window and a 6-foot-tall man who looked like he was seconds away from swinging. "Get off my bus," H whispered. His voice was shaking. "Please, you're scaring the children." The brother laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. "The children? You should have thought about that yesterday, old man." The brother leaned in closer, his shadow stretching across the dashboard, blocking out the morning sun. For a split second, H thought this was it. He thought he was going to be the next headline on the evening news. "Get off. Now," H said, and this time his voice didn't shake. It was the voice of a man who had reached his limit. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion in H's eyes, or maybe the entitled mother realized she'd already done enough damage to feel victorious. She sneered, adjusting her coat. "We're going," she snapped. "But don't think this is over. We're going straight to the board. You're finished." The 3 of them stepped off the bus, one by one, moving with the smug swagger of people who thought they just won a fight. The moment the brother's boot hit the pavement, H didn't wait. He didn't check his mirrors. He slammed the lever shut, shifted into gear, and the engine roared as he floored it. He drove the rest of the route in a trance. His hands felt like blocks of ice. He didn't say a word to the kids as they filed off at the front entrance, but he noticed their faces. They were pale. Some of the younger ones were still wiping tears from their cheeks. H didn't go to the break room. He didn't go to his supervisor. He walked straight into the front office of the high school. He looked so bad, gray-faced and trembling, that the secretary stood up immediately. "Mr. Henderson, are you okay?" "I need to see the assistant principal," H managed to say. "Now." 5 minutes later, my dad was sitting in his office watching the playback. He didn't say a word, He just watched the three adults storm the bus. He heard the slurs. He heard the screaming. But most importantly, he heard the sound of those terrified kids crying in the background. In this county, every bus is equipped with 4 HD cameras and high-sensitivity audio sensors. They don't just record video, they capture the exact moment a person's heart breaks. My dad paused the video on a clear, sharp frame of the mother's face. She was mid-scream, looking like a monster. "Who are they?" my dad asked. "The Miller family," the school cop said, leaning over his shoulder. "The daughter is a junior here. The son, he's got a record." My dad leaned back in his chair. He tapped a pen against the desk. Click, click, click. It was the only sound in the room. "They forgot one thing," my dad said. "What's that?" the cop asked. "They forgot that this bus isn't their living room. It's school property. And I'm in charge of school property." He looked at the screen again. "They think they're the ones making threats? They have no idea what's coming for them." My dad didn't waste a second. He picked up his desk phone and hit a speed dial number. "Principal Miller, I need you in my office, now, and bring the school cop." When the principal walked in, he saw my dad staring at the frozen frame of the entitled brother looming over H. He looked at the screen, then at my dad's face. He'd known my dad long enough to recognize that specific look, the one David used to get back at the trenches, right before a gang leader got expelled. "David," the principal said, "what are we looking at?" "A kidnapping," my dad said flatly. The principal's eyes went wide. "Wait, kidnapping? They just shouted at him." "They boarded a state-funded vehicle without authorization, trapped a public employee in his seat, and prevented him from moving a bus full of minors for nearly 5 minutes, my dad countered, his voice like cold steel. "In my book, that's interference with a public servant, trespassing, and intimidation. If H had tried to leave, they wouldn't let him. That's unlawful restraint." The school cop nodded slowly, his hand resting on his belt. "He's right, especially with the audio. Those aren't just insults. Those are threats of violence." "I want them handled," the principal said, looking at my dad. "David, this is your territory. You've got the background for this. You handle the Millers. I'll handle the school board if they complain about aggressive discipline." That was the green light. My dad turned back to the cop. "I want the mother arrested today. Not tomorrow. Today. I want her picked up at her house, in front of the neighbors. And the brother? Find out where he is. If he's at work, pick him up there." "What about the girl?" the cop asked. "She's in 3rd period English right now." My dad paused. A small, dark smile touched his lips. "Leave her for now. I want her to go home and find out her family is in handcuffs. It'll be a good lesson in consequences." The cop stepped out to make the calls to the local precinct. My dad stayed in his chair, watching the video one more time. He watched the moment the brother laughed at H. "You think it's funny to scare kids?" my dad whispered to the screen. "Let's see how much you laugh in a cage." Within 2 hours, 3 squad cars were pulling up to the Miller residence. They didn't knock quietly. They didn't ask for a statement. They walked in with the video evidence already processed and a warrant for malicious harassment. The entitled mother didn't go quietly. She screamed about her rights. She told the officers her brother was a lawyer. He wasn't. She even tried to slam the door on them. That was her second mistake of the day. While the police were busy wrestling the entitled mother into a cruiser, my dad and the school cop were back in the office, digging through the state's digital records. The cop's fingers flew across the keyboard. The the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his eyes. "Okay, here we go," the cop said, leaning back. Entitled Brother. Name's Jason, 22 years old. My dad crossed his arms. "What's his sheet look like?" "It's colorful," the cop muttered. "Assault, disorderly conduct, 2 counts of petty theft. But look at the bottom, David. This is the gold." He pointed to a blinking red status on the screen. Probation. "He's in the middle of a 6-month probationary period for a domestic disturbance," the cop explained, a grim smile spreading across his face. One of the conditions of his release was good behavior and no contact with law enforcement. Entering a school bus to threaten a driver? That's not just a new crime. That's a ticket back to the big house. My dad let out a slow, sharp breath. So he's already on thin out, and he decided to spend his freedom terrorizing a 64-year-old man in front of 30 kids. Essentially, the cop said, he just traded his probation for a prison cell. He doesn't even know it yet. My dad walked over to the window, looking out at the student parking lot. He's the type who thinks the rules are for other people. He thinks because his mom screams the loudest, they're protected. But the law doesn't care how loud you yell. He turned back to the cop. "I want the DA's office on this. Don't just file the report. Can send them the HD audio from the bus. I want them to hear the kids crying. I want them to hear Jason threatening to end H." "I'm on it," the cop said. "Good," my dad said, his voice dropping an octave. "Because I'm not just looking for a fine. I want this family to understand that when they step onto one of our buses, they're stepping into a courtroom." My dad knew that a video was powerful, but voices were undeniable. He didn't want this to be a he said, she said battle between a driver and a group of angry adults. He wanted the jury and the judge to see the world through the eyes of the kids who were trapped on that bus. "We need statements," my dad told the school counselor. "Every kid who was sitting in the first 5 rows. I want to know exactly what they saw, what they heard, and most importantly, how they felt." Over the next few hours, my dad sat in on the interviews. One by one, the kids were brought into the quiet, sun-drenched conference room. These weren't the tough high schoolers he was used to at his old school. These were middle schoolers and freshmen who still looked at adults as protectors. "He was so big," one 6th-grade girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. She was twisting the strap of her backpack until her knuckles turned white. "He stood right over Mr. Henderson. I thought he was going to hit him." "What did the lady say?" my dad asked gently. "She called him a worthless loser," the girl said, her eyes welling up. "She said she was going to have his house. I don't want Mr. Henderson to lose his house. He's nice." My dad scribbled notes, his heart hardening with every word. By the time the 10th student had finished their statement, he had a mountain of evidence, 10 different accounts, all describing the same thing: a coordinated, terrifying ambush. "It's not just harassment anymore," my dad said to the school cop as they looked over the pile of papers. "This is trauma. These kids are afraid to get back on the bus tomorrow morning. We've got the statements, we've got the video, and we've got Jason's probation record," the cop replied, tucking the files into a manila folder. "The DA is going to have a field day with this." My dad leaned back, his eyes fixed on the world's best dad mug I'd given him years ago. "Good. Because I'm about to make sure the Millers never set foot on this property again. Not just the mom and the brother, yet all of them." He picked up his pen. It was time to sign the permanent ban orders. My dad didn't just want the Millers in court. He wanted them erased from the school community. He spent the next hour drafting the official Notice of Permanent Trespass. In the school system, this is the nuclear option. It meant if the mother, the brother, or the college sister so much as touched a tire to the school's gravel, they were going to jail. No warnings. No second chances. "Sign here," my dad said, sliding the papers across to the principal. "Permanent?" the principal asked, hovering the pen. "Usually we start with a 90-day ban for parents." "They hijacked a bus," my dad reminded him. "They lost the right to be called parents the second they stepped over that yellow line. Now they're just suspects." The principal signed. With the legal paperwork filed, my dad turned his attention to Mr. Henderson. He found the driver in the lounge, staring into a cold cup of coffee. The man looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "H," my dad said, sitting down across from him. "Go home." I have the afternoon route, David. I can do it. I don't want to let the kids down." "You're not doing the afternoon route. In fact, you're not doing any route for the next 4 weeks." H's face fell. "Am I being suspended? Because I swear I didn't say anything to that girl." "Stop," my dad interrupted, a rare smile breaking through his professional mask. "You're not suspended. You're on paid administrative leave. 1 month, full salary, no deductible. Think of it as a thank you for not losing your cool when 3 lunatics tried to take over your bus." H blinked, the color slowly returning to his cheeks. "A month? Paid? Every cent. And when you come back, things are going to be different. I've already authorized a route change for entitled girl. She won't be on your bus. She won't be on any bus in this neighborhood. She's been moved to the south route. It's a 40-minute walk for her to the nearest stop." H let out a long, shaky breath. "You did that?" "It's the least I could do," my dad said. "And one more thing. I've spoken to the school's lawyer. We're not just filing a report. We're pressing full charges: malicious harassment, intimidation, and trespassing for both the mother and the brother." My dad stood up, clapping H on the shoulder. "Go home. Get some sleep. We'll handle the rest." As H walked toward his car, my dad watched him from the window. He felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The petty revenge, the route change, the ban, the paid time off was just the appetizer. The main course was still sitting in a county jail cell, waiting for a bail hearing. He checked his watch. It was almost 4 p.m. Entitled girl would be getting out of class soon. She'd be walking to her bus stop, only to find a different driver, a different route, and eventually, a house that was missing a mother and a brother. The number of charges being tallied up by the DA's office made my dad's blood run cold with satisfaction. The district attorney's office didn't just take the case, they devoured it. Usually, school bus squabbles are buried under a mountain of paperwork, but the audio from Bus 47 was a game-changer. My dad sat in his office as the speakerphone buzzed with the voice of the lead prosecutor. "David, I've listened to the tape," the prosecutor said. "The sound of those kids screaming, it's gut-wrenching. We're moving forward with everything: malicious harassment, intimidation of a public official, and 3 counts of child endangerment." My dad leaned back, a pen balanced between his fingers. "What about the brother, Jason? Tell me the probation officer is on board." "On board?" The prosecutor let out a dry laugh. "The PO was the first one to sign off. Jason's original crime was a domestic disturbance, and he was specifically warned that any aggressive behavior would trigger an immediate revocation. Walking onto that bus was essentially Jason's way of asking to go back to prison. The strategy was simple. They would process the mother and the brother separately, but use the same evidence for both. The DA was looking for a plea deal, but my dad was whispering in the principal's ear, making sure the school didn't back down. No deals, my dad told them. I want them in front of a judge. I want the community to see that there is a price to pay for this. The mother was released on bail that night, but Jason wasn't so lucky. Because he'd violated his probation, he was held without bond. The Miller family was already starting to crumble, and the trial was still weeks away. But the entitled mother still thought she could win. She hired a lawyer who was known for making problems go away. She was about to find out that some problems don't just go away, they get bigger. While her mother was busy screaming at a bail bondsman, entitled girl, E.G., was facing a reality check she never saw coming. On Monday morning, she walked out to her driveway at 6:45 a.m., designer backpack over one shoulder, scrolling through her phone. She waited and waited. The clock hit 7 a.m., no bus. She didn't know that my dad had hand-delivered the route change notice to the transportation office on Friday afternoon. He'd made sure it was processed with extreme priority. Finally, she saw a bus. It was the familiar yellow frame of Bus 47, H's bus. But as it slowed down near her house, it didn't stop. It didn't even tap the brakes. The new driver, a no-nonsense woman covering for H, didn't even look her way. She just kept driving, the diesel exhaust blowing a cloud of black smoke right into E.G.'s face. E.G. stood there, coughing, her mouth hanging open. "Hey, you missed me!" she screamed at the disappearing taillights. She had to walk. My dad had moved her stop to the south road, which was nearly 2 miles away through a patch of woods and over a steep hill. By the time she finally reached the new stop, her expensive white sneakers were covered in mud, and her hair was a frizzy mess from the humidity. When she finally limped into the school office an hour late, my dad was waiting. He was leaning against the counter, sipping water from a paper cup. "You're late," he said, not even looking at his watch. "The bus didn't stop," she yelled, slamming her bag on the counter. "My mom is going to sue you. Do you know what she's going to do to you?" My dad didn't flinch. He just looked at her muddy shoes. "Your mom is currently occupied with a legal matter of her own. As for you, you have detention for being late. And since you're no longer on the north route, I'd suggest you start walking faster tomorrow." He walked away before she could respond. The princess of the neighborhood had officially been dethroned. The entitled mother didn't go for a public defender. She scraped together enough cash to hire a guy named Miller, no relation, a defense attorney with a reputation for being a pit bull in the local courts. He showed up to the pre-trial meeting wearing a suit that cost more than my dad's car and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had never touched a floor. "Let's be reasonable, David," the lawyer said, leaning back in the conference room chair. He had that oily, practiced smile of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. "My client is a pillar of the community. She had a momentary lapse in judgment because she was worried about her daughter. A mother's instinct, you understand?" My dad didn't smile back. He didn't even lean in. A mother's instinct usually involves checking a kid's homework, not boarding a state vehicle to scream slurs at a grandfather. That's not an instinct. That's a felony. The lawyer waved a hand dismissively. "The video is grainy. The audio is subjective." My client felt threatened by the driver's aggressive stance. "We're prepared to offer a formal apology and maybe 50 hours of community service. Let's not clog up the courts with a school bus spat." My dad looked at the DA, who was sitting next to him. The DA just tapped a manila folder. "Grainy?" the DA asked. We have 4 different angles in 1080p. We have audio sensors that captured every syllable of the threats your client made. And as for subjective, I have 10 signed statements from minors describing the fear they felt. The lawyer's smile twitched, just for a second. Children are easily influenced. They see what the school tells them to see. They see a man 3 times their size looming over their driver, my dad countered, and they hear a woman telling a man he's finished. We aren't taking a plea, counselor. We're going to trial, and we're going for the maximum. The pit bull lawyer gathered his things, his movements a little more rushed than they had been 10 minutes ago. You're making a mistake. This is a mountain out of a molehill. No, my dad said, watching him walk toward the door. This is a mountain sitting right on top of your client, and it's about to start sliding. While his mother was busy playing the victim and spending thousands on a legal pit bull, Jason, the entitled brother, was learning the hard way that a prison cell is very different from his mother's living room. He wasn't out on bail. He was sitting in a 6x9 holding cell, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that made his pale skin look sickly. His probation officer had been blunt. Jason, I told you one more slip and you're gone. You didn't just slip. You jumped off a cliff. Every time the heavy steel door of the block slammed shut, the sound echoed through Jason's skull. He was no longer the big man on the bus. Without his mother behind him to shriek and his sister to back him up, he looked like what he actually was. A 22-year-old with no plan and a very long future behind bars. My dad visited the jail once, accompanied by the school cop. He didn't go to talk to Jason. He went to drop off a formal subpoena for the preliminary hearing. He watched through the thick glass of the visitation room as Jason was let in. Jason looked at my dad, and for the first time, the thug act was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were trembling as he picked up the receiver. "You're the guy from the school," Jason muttered, his voice flat. "I'm the assistant principal," my dad corrected him. "And I'm here to make sure you remember every second of that morning on bus 47, because the judge is going to hear it all." "My mom says we're going to win," Jason said, but his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like a kid trying to convince himself that the monster under the bed wasn't real. "She says the driver started it." My dad leaned in closer to the glass. "The driver didn't start the HD cameras, Jason. You did. You chose to step onto that bus. You chose to threaten a man in front of 30 witnesses." Jason didn't respond. He just stared at his own reflection in the reinforced glass. "Your mother is facing 30 days, my dad said quietly. "But you're looking at a year, minimum. All because you wanted to play the hero for your sister." Jason hung up the phone. He didn't look back as the guards led him away. He was realizing that in the real world, entitled doesn't mean immune. It just means you have further to fall. Word travels fast in a town where the most exciting news is usually a high school football score. By Friday, the bus 47 ambush was the only thing people were talking about at the local diners and grocery stores. The community wasn't just shocked, they were protective. "I've known H for 15 years, a woman said at the school board meeting that Tuesday night. She was clutching a coffee thermos, her knuckles red from the cold. "He drove my oldest to graduation and my youngest to kindergarten. To think those people trapped him like that, it's disgusting." The school board room was packed. You could smell the wet coats and the scent of cheap floor wax. Today my dad sat in the front row, arms crossed, watching the row of board members. Usually, these meetings were a battleground of budget cuts, but tonight, there was a rare, unified front. "We've seen the footage," the board president announced, her voice echoing through the microphone. And we want to make it clear. Our school buses are extensions of our classrooms. Violence and intimidation will not be tolerated. We fully support the administration's decision to pursue maximum charges. The entitled mother had tried to drum up support on Facebook, posting a long, rambling video about school overreach and protecting her daughter. But the comment section was a graveyard of her own reputation. Parents she'd known for years were calling her out, posting their own stories of her entitled behavior at PTA meetings and soccer games. The tide had turned. The Millers weren't just facing a judge. They were facing a town that had decided they didn't belong anymore. They thought they could bully a driver, my dad whispered to the principal. They didn't realize they were bullying the whole community. The stage was set. The evidence was filed. All that was left was the walk to the courthouse. The morning of the trial was bone-chillingly cold. A thin layer of frost coated the windshield of my dad's truck, and the air had that sharp, metallic taste that only comes with a deep winter freeze. My dad sat in the driveway for a few minutes, the engine idling with a low, rhythmic thrum. "You nervous?" I asked, leaning against the passenger door. "No," he said, checking his tie in the rearview mirror. "Just focused. This isn't about winning a fight anymore, and it's about setting a standard. If we let this go, every parent with a grudge thinks they can board a bus and act like an animal." He looked over at me, his eyes tired but sharp. "I saw Mr. Henderson this morning. He was at the depot, just sitting in his car. He didn't want to come in today, but I told him he didn't have to say a word. He just needs to be there. He needs to see that the system actually works for people like him." We drove to the courthouse in silence. The building was a massive gray stone structure that felt like it was designed to make people feel small. As we walked up the wide concrete steps, I saw the justice crew already forming. The principal was there, looking uncharacteristically somber in a dark wool coat. The school cop was leaning against a pillar, his polished boots gleaming under the streetlights. Then, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The entitled mother stepped out. She wasn't wearing the disheveled housecoat from the arrest video. She was dressed in a conservative navy suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, carrying a Bible in one hand like a shield. She looked like a different person until she saw my dad. Her mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her eyes narrowed, and her mouth thinned into that familiar, ugly line of pure contempt. She whispered something to her pit bull lawyer, who patted her hand with a practiced, fake empathy. "She's playing the part," the principal muttered, joining us at the door. "Let her play," my dad said, pulling open the heavy brass door. "The video doesn't care what she's wearing." The courthouse hallway felt like a pressure cooker. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner, and the high ceilings made every footstep echo like a gunshot. On one side of the wooden benches sat our group: my dad, the principal, the school cop, and the school's attorney. We were a wall of dark suits and quiet discipline. On the other side stood the Miller camp. The entitled mother was clutching her Bible so hard her knuckles were white. Her college-age daughter was beside her, looking bored and scrolling through her phone, while their pit bull lawyer paced the tiles, checking his gold watch every 30 seconds. The tension was so thick you could feel it in your teeth. "Look at them," my dad whispered, nodding toward the mother. "She still thinks she can charm her way out of this." "She's about to meet Judge Holloway," the school cop replied, a grim smirk on his face. "He doesn't do charm. He only does evidence." The heavy double doors to the courtroom creaked open. Pause for a second. We are literally seconds away from seeing the hammer of justice drop on this family. Would you have pushed for jail time like my dad did? Or is a permanent ban enough? Drop a comment below because I need to know if we're being too petty. Also, smash that like button if you're enjoying the justice. All right, here's the verdict. Walking into Judge Holloway's courtroom felt like stepping into a freezer. The room was clad in dark, heavy oak that seemed to soak up all the light, and the air carried the dry, papery scent of old law books. High on the wall, the state seal looked down on us with a cold, golden eye. My dad took his seat in the front row, his back straight as a board. A few seats down, Mr. Henderson sat hunched over, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the woodwork. The bailiff stood up, his voice cutting through the hushed whispers. All rise for the Honorable Judge Holloway. Holloway didn't walk. He glided to the bench. He was a man with iron gray hair and eyes that looked like they could burn through a brick wall. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the gallery. He just opened the folder on his desk and started reading. The silence was absolute. The entitled mother's lawyer stood up first, smoothing his expensive lapels. Your Honor, he began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. We are looking at a dedicated mother of 3 who simply had a protective reflex. She was concerned for her daughter's safety after an unfortunate encounter with the driver. Was she loud? Perhaps. But was she malicious? No. The mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief, producing a single, tiny sob that echoed through the silent room. She looked like a saint who had wandered into a den of lions. My dad let out a soft, dry snort. He had seen this exact performance 100 times at his old school, the I'm a good person mask that slips on the moment a badge appears. Judge Holloway didn't look up from his papers. He didn't even acknowledge the sob. He just tapped his pen against the bench. Thud, thud, thud. Protective reflex, the judge repeated, his voice dangerously flat. Interesting choice of words, counselor. The pit bull lawyer reached for his remote and ready to play a heavily edited clip of the confrontation. If the court would allow, I have a video showing the driver's dismissive attitude. Sit down, counselor, Judge Holloway interrupted. He didn't look up from his screen. I've already watched the full, unedited footage from all 4 angles, multiple times. I've also listened to the audio recordings of the minors in the background. The lawyer's hand froze mid-air. The entitled mother stopped dabbing her eye. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. I don't need a presentation, the judge continued, his voice cold and precise. The evidence doesn't lie, and it doesn't have a protective reflex. What I saw was 3 adults ambushing a trapped public servant and terrorizing 30 children. I've seen enough to know exactly what kind of reflex we're dealing with. The mother's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. The Saint Act was dead. Judge Holloway leaned forward, his robes rustling like dry leaves. He looked directly at the mother, his gaze pinning her to the chair. You threatened the life of a man who was simply doing his job. You endangered 30 children for no reason other than your own ego. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The mother's lawyer tried to speak. Your Honor, a fine would surely— I'm not finished, the judge barked. I am sentencing you to 30 days in the county jail, effective immediately. The courtroom gasped. My dad felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. Even he hadn't expected 30 days for a first-time offense. The mother's Bible hit the floor with a heavy thud as the bailiff stepped toward her, the metal of his handcuffs glinting in the light. 30 days? She shrieked, her voice back to that ugly bus hijacking rasp. You can't do this. I just did, Holloway said, already looking at the next file. Next case. The mother was being let out, sobbing and screaming about her rights. But my dad wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the defense table. It was empty. The back-to-back trial was supposed to start for Jason, the entitled brother, in exactly 2 minutes. Where is he? My dad whispered to the school cop. The cop checked his watch, his brow furrowing. He was processed for transport. He should be in the holding area. The pit bull lawyer was looking around frantically, his face turning a panicked shade of red. He leaned over to his assistant, whispering harshly. The college sister, who had been so bored earlier, now had her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes wide with terror. Judge Holloway looked down at the empty chair, then at the clock. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't the heavy silence of a verdict anymore. It was the cold, sharp silence of a hunt. Counselor, Holloway said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. Where is your client? The pit bull lawyer stammered, his polished confidence evaporating. I don't know, Your Honor. He was supposed to be here. I haven't been able to reach him. Judge Holloway didn't wait for another excuse. He didn't ask for a search. He simply picked up his gavel and brought it down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Mr. Miller has a history of disregarding the law, but he will not disregard this court, Holloway stated, his eyes flashing with a cold fire. A bench warrant is issued for the arrest of Jason Miller. Immediately. My dad and the principal exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Skipping a trial while on probation? It was the dumbest move Jason could have made. He's done, the school cop whispered, already tapping on his radio. He just turned a misdemeanor into a felony manhunt. The college sister burst into tears, dropping her phone. The game was over. The courthouse was still buzzing as my dad and the school cop stepped out into the freezing afternoon air. The cop didn't even wait to reach his cruiser. He was already barking orders into his shoulder mic. I need a unit at the Miller residence on Pine Street, he snapped. Bench warrant issued for Jason Miller. My suspect is a flight risk. High probability he's holed up in the basement or trying to pack a bag. My dad watched the cop's car peel away, sirens wailing, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the quiet town like a knife. He felt a strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. He'd spent decades chasing kids down hallways, but this was the real world catching up to a bully who thought he was untouchable. He's actually hiding at the house? I asked as we got into the truck. After his mom just got hauled off to jail? Bullies like Jason don't have a plan B, my dad said, shifting into gear. They have a hide and hope strategy. He thinks if he's not in the courtroom, the problem doesn't exist. He's about to find out that the law has a very long reach. We didn't go to the house. My dad knew better than to interfere with an active arrest. But the school cop called 30 minutes later. His voice was thick with the kind of satisfaction you only get after a long day of doing the right thing. We got him, David, the cop said over the static of the radio. Was he trying to run? Worse, the cop laughed. He was sitting on the couch in his mother's living room, eating a bowl of cereal and watching cartoons. He actually tried to tell us that he forgot he had court today. Said he thought it was next Tuesday. And the handcuffs? My dad asked. He didn't go quiet. He started crying the second we touched the steel to his wrists. Kept asking if he could call his mom. I had to tell him she was already being processed at the county lockup. He looked like he was going to throw up. Jason had spent his whole life being shielded by his mother's shrieking. Every time he got into trouble, she was there to yell at the world until they gave up. But she wasn't there now. She was in a cell, and Jason was in the back of a cruiser, finally facing the one thing he couldn't bully: the consequences of his own choices. "Bring him in," my dad said. "I want to be there when he sees the judge tomorrow morning." "Oh, the judge is already waiting," the cop said. "Holloway stayed late just to sign the committal papers. He's not going to be happy." My dad hung up and looked at the school building as we drove past. It looked peaceful. The buses were lined up in the lot, the yellow paint gleaming under the sunset. She would be coming back in a few weeks to a school that was a little bit safer and a neighborhood that was a little bit quieter. But for Jason, the night was just beginning, and it was going to be a very, very long year. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The justice crew was back, but the atmosphere wasn't tense anymore. It was surgical. We were there to watch the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. When the side door opened, Jason was let in. He wasn't the tough guy from the bus anymore. He looked small. His hair was greasy. His orange jumpsuit was 2 sizes too big, and his eyes were red-rimmed from a night spent in a holding cell. He looked at my dad, then quickly looked at the floor, his shoulders hunched up to his ears. Judge Holloway didn't even wait for the bailiff to finish the opening. He sat on the bench, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, looking down at Jason like a scientist looking at a particularly disappointing specimen. "Mr. Miller," Holloway began, his voice low and vibrating with a suppressed fury. "You were given the gift of probation. You were told that the state would give you one last chance to be a productive member of society. And how did you use that gift?" Jason opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "You used it to board a school bus," the judge continued, his voice rising. "You used it to loom over a 64-year-old man. You used it to threaten children. And then, as if your contempt for the law wasn't clear enough, you skipped your court date to sit on a sofa and eat cereal." The pit bull lawyer stood up, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not," Holloway barked, slamming his hand onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Miller has proven that he is a danger to the community and a mockery of this court. I am revoking his probation in its entirety." My dad leaned forward, his heart hammering in his chest. This was it. For the original charges, and for the new charges of malicious harassment and intimidation, I am sentencing you to 1 year in the state penitentiary, Holloway declared. "Take him away." Jason didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just went limp as the guards grabbed his arms. He looked like a puppet with the strings cut. As he was led through the side door, the door that leads straight to the transport van, he looked back one last time. He didn't see his mother. He didn't see his sister. He just saw my dad, sitting there with his arms crossed, a man who had seen 100 Jasons and knew exactly where they all ended up. A month had passed since the hammer of justice had flattened the Miller family. The morning air was still crisp, but the sharp, metallic bite of winter was finally starting to soften into the scent of damp earth and early spring. Mr. Henderson, good old H, pulled his car into the bus depot at 6 a.m. sharp. He'd spent his 4 weeks of paid leave doing exactly what my dad suggested: sleeping, fishing, and trying to forget the sound of 3 adults screaming in his face. He climbed the steps of Bus 47, his hand lingering on the cold metal railing. For a second, he just stood in the well of the bus, looking at the driver's seat. You okay, H? My dad asked. He was standing on the pavement, his breath blooming in a white cloud. He'd made it a point to be there for H's first day back. I am, David, H said, sitting down and adjusting the mirrors. Just feels quiet, in a good way. It's going to stay that way, my dad promised. The south route is working out for the Miller girl. She's quiet, too. Hard to be entitled when you're walking 4 miles a day in the mud. As H pulled out of the lot, my dad watched the taillights fade into the morning fog. The peace had returned to the school, but it was a reinforced peace. The story of the 30-day sentence for the mother and the full year for the brother had rippled through the district. Other difficult parents were suddenly much more polite in the car rider line. The hammer hadn't just hit the Millers. It had sent a shockwave through every person who thought they were above the rules. H's first stop was a familiar one. As the doors hissed open, the 6th-grade girl who had cried during the ambush stepped up. She didn't look scared anymore. She was holding something in her hand, a slightly smashed cupcake in a plastic bag with a welcome back sticker on it. "We missed you, Mr. Henderson," she whispered. H took the cupcake, his eyes shining. "I missed you too, kiddo. Sit down. Let's get to school." The dust finally settled, leaving behind a neighborhood that felt noticeably lighter. The Miller house, once a hub of high-volume drama and neighborly disputes, sat quiet. With the mother and brother serving their time, the princess, the entitled girl, was left in the care of an aunt who had zero patience for her niece's designer tantrums. My dad saw her one last time before the school year ended. She was trudging toward the South Route stop, her once pristine sneakers now permanently stained with the red clay of the backroads. She didn't look up as his truck passed. The fire was gone, replaced by a sullen, weary realization that her family's invincibility had been a lie. "You think she learned anything?" I asked him that evening as we sat on the back porch, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. "Maybe," my dad said, leaning back in his chair. "Hard to say with kids like that, but she learned that actions have a price tag, and for the first time in her life, her mom couldn't pay it for her." He looked out over the yard, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He'd spent his career in the trenches, and while he'd retired from the front lines, he'd proven that he still knew how to win the war. He hadn't just protected a driver, he'd protected the boundary between order and chaos. "H sent me a photo today," my dad added, pulling out his phone. It was a shot of the bus dashboard, cluttered with drawings, cards, and half-eaten snacks from the kids. He says the bus has never been quieter. Turns out, when you remove the one person who thinks they're the center of the universe, the rest of the world gets along just fine.